diving back. We're moving back into the Beatitudes today. I forgot to mention a prayer need. Now, that'll come up on the recording. We'll let it sit. It's okay. I have been asked to do an interview by our school newspaper. After 44 years of working there, they would like me to talk about my experiences as an employee at Cal State University Northridge. And if you know anything about my experiences at Cal State University, which I've shared with you, some of those might be interesting to talk about in the school paper. So be praying for some wisdom as I come to grips with that. But they would like to interview me as one of the longest term employees the university's ever had. So we'll just have to see how that turns out. In any event, back into the Beatitudes, back into Matthew chapter 5. As I told you, we only ask a Beatitude a week, and we're not going to now focus on blessed are the merciful. If you've been listening, if you've been staying with us, we've tried to set the tone for this. And last week, I spent some time letting you know how we have to view the book of Matthew, why this sits in here the way it does, why this gospel has a very complete version of this sermon, and not all the others do. And if you recall now, and if you don't, you weren't here last week, I'm bringing you up to date with review. Matthew has a very particular theme. Each of the Gospels does. And if you recall, Matthew's was what theme?
King.
The king. Matthew is addressing the issue of the king. This is where we stand on this. Matthew is making the case that the long-anticipated and the long-awaited king that Israel had wanted has arrived. This is the identity of Jesus Christ. I remember some years ago when I first got to go to the theater and I watched Fiddler on the Roof. And some of you may have seen that movie. There's a very poignant scene there. The Jews are being thrown out of Russia at that time. The decision has been made by the Tsar that the Jews are no longer welcome, and their homes are being confiscated. They're being thrown into the streets, and they're gathering the last of their belongings. They gather around the rabbi there, and one of the Jews turns to him and says, "Rabbi, we have waited so long for the Messiah. Wouldn't this be a great time for him to come?" And that hit me very hard, that you have to think how many Jewish generations had that moment. I know that was just a movie, but in history, in fact, you have to think that there were a number of times when the Jews stood at that moment with all they've gone through, with all the oppression they've suffered at the hands of so many regimes. How many generations stood at that moment and thought, wouldn't now be the time? You'd have to think in World War II. If you were in Europe at that time, the Jews had to be thinking, this would be the time. To have the king arrive, to have this injustice stop, to have this persecution end. And understand, as Jesus stands here opening this sermon, this is one of those times in history. The Jews have suffered at the hands of one empire after another. And now here they sit, having thrown off the Greeks, having a brief moment of Jewish independence. Now Rome has its iron grip on them. And as they watch history unfold through these generations, Rome isn't getting any less powerful. Rome, there seems to be no end in sight. There seems to be no relief and no possibility. And this generation had to be one of those Jewish generations that sat there thinking, now would be a good time. And it turns out it was the time. And this is what Matthew is making his case at. The king has arrived and you missed it. All of these opportunities, all of these moments that we as Jews have thought about, here's the time. Now, if you're going to make the case that Jesus is the king, what does Matthew need to present? What do you need from Matthew? You're the Jewish audience now. You're sitting there. You know your scriptures. You know the promise. What do you need to see from Matthew to convince you this is the guy? What's that?
Somebody walks up, it's like a beautiful light or whatever, and then comes with a sword, just knocks everybody out.
You want some power demonstration, don't you? You want some guy that's coming out of here and showing he can get these Romans out of here. You want to see some demonstration of power.
Beat the bullies.
There you go. What's the beginning point? First off, you know that the king is supposed to be from a particular line. So what do you need as proof? You need that genealogy. You need to know he's from the Davidic line. So where does Matthew begin his whole letter, his whole book here? He says, there he is. This is the king. This is the guy. He comes from the Davidic line. What else do you need to have? If you remember some things from history, try this one. When Saul's kingdom was taken away, how was the new king chosen? How was it that you knew this was the guy God wanted when David became the king?
He was anointed.
Anointed by whom?
Samuel.
The prophet. The prophet, the Old Testament prophet, comes along and says it's no longer going to be Saul. We're forming a new line, a permanent line, the line of David. And he says this is the guy. What do we have presented in the early chapters of Matthew?
Prophet.
A prophet, the last of the Old Testament prophets, John the Baptist, says this is the guy. We have that confirmation. He's from the right line, and God's prophet has anointed him and laid it out. Now, what else do you want to see? What do you need? Because there's been a long line of guys claiming this. There's going to be people before Jesus and after him that have come along and all claim that they are the guy. What else do you want to see to convince you this guy stands out in the crowd? Here you go. You want power. One, you want a king that offers authority. So we see that. He comes in and delivers, the king delivers his speech. This is an announcement of his arrival. And he says, you have heard it said, but I tell you, he announces authority. And how does he prove that authority? Well, as soon as you finish these 3 chapters of this sermon, notice what it begins with in chapter 8. The man with leprosy. We have the faith of the centurion, and his son is healed. You have a whole series of them. Jesus heals many. Jesus heals the paralytic. We have all this series where he says, if you don't want to believe what I'm telling you, how about I demonstrate for you who I am? Remember, that was what was said in John. They were all challenging, but Jesus says, if you don't want to listen to my words, how about this? Explain this. If you're too stupid to understand the scriptures, can you at least believe your own eyes when you're seeing these kinds of signs? Have you ever seen this before? That's the challenge. Have you seen anything like this before? Has anyone ever done anything like this before? That's the challenge he puts out, and this is how Matthew structures it. The king's line, the prophet's declaration, the king lays out his agenda and claims to be king with authority and then proves he has the power. How did they miss this?
I don't know.
Because their mind was so set on the military ruler that even when they could see the things going on, their brain wouldn't believe it.
They couldn't. Because again and again, they stood at that moment, portrayed in that movie, and what they wanted was deliverance from earthly situations. They wanted a political solution. They wanted an end to the suffering. And that Jesus would come and say, I have the power, I have the means, and I can demonstrate it, but I'm not going to deliver you from that yet. Instead, you need to be delivered from something else. There's a greater need that I need to address here. There's something else that here's the issue. Here's what really slammed them. You aren't fit for the kingdom yet. All of that promise, all of that stuff you want in terms of deliverance and into it. If you were in the service today, we had Josh teaching from Samuel in 2 Samuel, and he went through this whole thing talking about that. And they're going, it's going to be an end to suffering. It's going to be an establishment of justice. All these things they wanted. But the pause comes here where Jesus says, the problem is you're not ready yet. You're not. Here's how strongly. I want you to look at Matthew chapter 5, I believe verse 20, if I'm not mistaken. And here's what it is. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven.
What?
Understand this. They were waiting for a Jewish king to deliver Jewish people, and Jesus says, oh, by the way, that's not going to get you in. And here's the standard. The standard is your righteousness has to be better than that of the people who have been teaching you for generations what righteousness looks like. Do you understand that? I'm going to hold up to you and say the most righteous person you know, the person that supposedly sets the standard for you as to what it means to please God, won't cut it. The best you got can't get in. Now, can you imagine the Jews sitting there thinking, well, if they don't qualify, how do I get in? That's what goes on here. And that's exactly what Jesus wants to establish. The standard is impossible. Because this kingdom is not about politics. It's not about changing the course of history with a new regime and a new king just so you can be top of the heap. This kingdom is about something you haven't thought about in a while, and that is character. And that's when he begins the Beatitudes. 8 blessings, 8 issues that he says, this is what it takes to do 2 things. 1, this is what it's going to take in terms of character to get into the kingdom. And 2, this is what it's going to be demanded of you for character once you're in the kingdom. It's what you have to do to get in. It's how you're going to have to live after you arrive. And he understands that what he's asking here, every one of these things, stands in complete contrast to their understanding of what makes sense and what's possible. It's meant to be impossible. And do you understand why it's meant to be impossible? Because it comes down to this beginning point. Remember the very first one. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The very beginning point. Remember the imagery here, the language in the Greek talks about that beggar pushing his eyes away in shame, sitting on the street and holding out his hand and saying, if you don't help me, I won't make it. I am entirely dependent on your generosity in this moment. I have nothing unless you offer it. And this is the beginning point that Jesus wants to establish here. We have to step back from everything you've understood, everything you've thought, and come to a completely different understanding. 8 issues, and we've seen the first 4. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the beggar. Blessed are those who mourn. Mourn over what? Over your sin. Not the sin of the world, not how bad things are, not because your guy didn't get elected. No, we're not mourning over that stuff. What are we mourning over? What's in your life. The person who mourns over sin, they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek. Meek sets aside pride. What is the beginning point of all sin we found in Scripture? Pride. This steps back and says, it's not about me. It's also the strength of character to make a choice to be different. Remember, power under control. A decision now to live differently, to recognize a different standard. And those who are hunger and thirsting after what? Righteousness. Because what is the one thing you ain't got and can't get into the kingdom without? Righteousness. This is his beginning point. He sets an impossible standard. He shatters their understanding and says, this is the change that has come before you. This is what has to be different in your character. Not only that, this will not only get you into the kingdom, this is how you have to live in the kingdom. Why do you have to stay a beggar once you get into the kingdom? Because if you ever lose sight of what the source of life is, you stop living as a kingdom citizen. If you stop having meekness, if you stop having the structure of life to make the decisions for God, you're not living right in the kingdom. If you're not mourning over your sin on a daily basis, yes, God has forgiven the penalty of sin, but do we still struggle with sin and how we conduct ourselves on a daily basis? Yes. So therefore, we must be constantly thirsting for, never satisfied with, whatever righteousness we have in the moment, because we always know in this life there can be more. This is where he starts it. He talks about a problem with them. Now, I want you to understand something. These 4 first ones now are going to have a response, if you will, in the next 4. These are couplets. Each one of these results in something. Each one of these character traits now results in an action. Understand, the nature of character is not about just thinking. It also means you have to do something. Character means you act out. Having all the right information is how useful if you do nothing with it? Does nothing to change life. So he now is going to do this. And I want you to understand how these work out. Blessed then are the poor in spirit. He is depending upon someone's mercy to survive. A person who understands that mercy is the only reason he's living should result in doing what in their life? Showing mercy. So we have that first one. If you have been shown mercy, you're now going to lay out mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart. Those who mourn over sin will become what? If sin is not something you can tolerate in your own life, what is going to change in your conduct? A recognition and a need for a purity in heart. And they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers. Now let's go with meek. Meek is setting aside pride. Now let me ask you something. What is at the core of every conflict that you can think of in your life or between nations or between any people you've ever known? It always comes down to pride, doesn't it? When you're mad and you want to get even, it's because you sense an injustice that has been done to you. If you can set pride aside, what can you become? A peacemaker. You're the one person in the room that can finally bring peace to the situation because you don't have your ego invested in the moment. There's a change for that. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Now let me try this one. If you are hungering and thirsting after righteousness and your life is now patterned on the life of Jesus Christ, what response can you expect from a good portion of the world you live in? Persecution. Each of these is tied to the next four. And again, the impossible standard, because Jesus is making this clear, understand here that what I'm offering you is happiness. Try that. Happiness, we've said, God is defining for us a whole new understanding of what happy is, and he's saying happy comes in these circumstances. It happens when you're mourning, it happens when you're persecuted, it happens in the most amazingly weird places in your life. Happiness. And as I've said several times to you, we're going to use that word because there is no right word to put in here, because there is no English word, there is no Greek word that explains how in the world you can know joy, peace, how you can be happy in these circumstances under human understanding. Is there? And yet he says, if you really want to know what it means to be happy, and if you want to use the word joy, use the word joy. If you want to understand and say peace, use the word peace. But the bottom line is, no human word matches this. God has to define it for us completely new. Now, with that understanding and with that background, we come to this one here. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. And now we're going to have to sort this one out. Exactly what is going on here, and what does he mean, and what is the promise that we're being given? Now, on your first thought, as you look at this, how would you interpret this? If you show mercy, you will be shown mercy. What do you think? How does that work out in life? If I do nice things, at some point, people are going to what? Do nice things to me.
Pay it forward.
There you go, pay forward. Blessed are the merciful, they be shown mercy. Now, I want you to understand something here. Mercy, as it is understood here, was not a character that was highly regarded in the ancient world, in the Roman world at the time. Not in the Jewish culture, not in the Roman culture. Why would mercy not be a trait they held in high regard? What's that? It showed weakness. You let people walk all over you. You show mercy, it's just a sign of weakness. The Romans called mercy a disease of the soul. Yes, that pretty well sets it, doesn't it? This is a disease of the soul. It was seen as a weakness. And above all else, Romans respected strength. Mercy was not something you showed. They were the Cobra Kai approach, if you remember the Karate Kid. Show no mercy. We just don't do that. What they value was this. The prime thing in a Roman man was these things. It was a power of courage, discipline, and a demonstration of authority. That was what we honored. The Roman father had this power. When a new child was born, he just brought up a new child was born, what had to happen? The child was brought before the father, who made a decision. Was the child up to his standards or not?
What?
If the child was not up to his standards, and understand, his standards were anything he set, there was no rule book that he referred to. It meant, did the child please him? What kind of things might make the child unpleasing?
Deformity.
Small, gender.
Small, not as big as it should have been. I need a big strapping boy. If it's not a boy, it might be enough.
Is it gender?
Wrong gender could be an issue. If it had a deformity, I'm not going to deal with this. You know what the father's power was in the Roman world?
Exposure
Done. He can make two decisions. One, we could just toss it outside, and if someone decides to save it, so be it, but if not, or we'll drown it on the spot. And this was considered norm. That's how you demonstrated power. Decisive. Don't mess around, decide what's best. Mercy, think of the ridiculousness of mercy. A deformed child, look at all the trouble you're going to have. All the effort, all the expense. Why should I put up with that? Because life is about me.
Well, then Christ saying something like this is automatically turning off all of those people who are looking for that power, that strength, that savior, that Messiah, because they don't expect that this is what it's going to look like.
It's not supposed to look that way. And understand this, if you've invested yourself in the leadership of Israel, what you want is a king that's going to come along and establish a kingdom of power where you get to hold one of the great positions, because obviously he needs you because you're one of the best Jews in the world. Just ask me, I'll tell you who qualifies for the list, and I'm on it. And the expectation was, if Jesus was the right guy, he'd be coming in and passing out the power positions. You're looking for a new seat in Biden's office. You want to be one of the people on the board there. You want to have this opportunity. But this is where they had, understand this also, the religion of the Jews had grown into something completely outside the idea of mercy. It was a system based on merit. Here are the rules as we've written them out, and the more rules you follow, the higher up in the hierarchy you are. And it has nothing to do with accepting someone's weakness or a problem. It's all about what I've accomplished. And looking at something differently. I mean, come on. If God is impressed with me, and he must be because I follow the rule book, shouldn't you be impressed with me? I don't need mercy, and I don't give mercy. It was not in their structure. Now, you mentioned the comment, what goes around comes around. Let's think about this promise. As a rule, do you think that showing mercy will mean you will always receive mercy?
No.
Well, that seems very negative. Doesn't the Bible say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? Something like that.
But we live in a fallen world. We can't expect everybody to follow.
But why not? I've been even hearing it in our political realm. We've been talking about that. If America was just nicer to the other nations, they'd be nicer to us. Isn't that how it works?
In the eternal kingdom.
In the eternal kingdom, maybe. But you're right. If you're a parent for any time, have you noticed that the nice kid can be the one that gets picked on? If you're a teacher, you notice that the nice kid becomes a target. The tender-hearted one can often become a target to the other kids just because they're always nice and polite. That can be a problem. The reality doesn't always match up to that. Being nice to people is in no way guaranteed they're going to be nice to you. There is a really stunning example of that you might recall. There was this guy named Jesus. How did Jesus treat people? Very well. Regardless of what their background, he met with publicans and sinners, the prostitutes on the street. He treated them with respect. He came along and he was kind to everyone. People brought people to him that needed to be healed. And it says he healed some of them. Repeatedly, it says he from morning till night, he healed everyone who was brought to him. Do you ever hear him asking a question? One, do you believe I'm the Messiah before I do this? Never asked that. He never asked, do you like me as a person? He never asked if they came with the right attitude. He just healed them all. That's his approach to people in general. He was always kind. He was always nice. And of course, by doing that, the response from the world was showing him kindness. I love it. Pilate says, I find nothing wrong with this man, and sends him out to be crucified anyway. There were no issues to that. Gaining favor with our fellow man is not in view here. And I've read this in several commentaries, where the idea is that God is telling you, be nice to people if you want them to be nice to you. Now, I'll tell you, there's a little bit of truth to that. Polite can often get polite responses, but that is not the guarantee of this passage. It has nothing to do with what God is saying here. Nothing to do with it all.
More of a chance to be people who are merciful to you if you treat them. You have more of a chance.
You got a higher chance.
But it's not.
I love Paul's statement that pretty much sums it up. It says, if it is possible. Now, if he starts out with if it is possible, what is he saying? It may not be possible. And insofar as it depends on you, what's he saying there? It may not depend on you. Live at peace with all men. So he's saying, yeah, make the effort, and with some people, it'll work. But the problem is, it isn't always possible, and it isn't always up to you, and no matter what you do, some people are going to be a pain.
And you'll lay awake at night trying to think about ways to, be vengeful, and when you shouldn't.
We always want to get even. We always want to put some justice back into it. And again, understand the Jewish mindset. For a people who had been picked on, for a people who had been treated abysmally by one nation after another, what is it they think will even the score and make things right? Someone needs to come in and set the record straight and deal with the bad people and put us on top where we belong. And this isn't going to happen. Mercy here is not talking about gaining favor with our fellow man. Mercy here talks about having the right attitude of a relationship to God, and that a response comes from that, and that response is mercy. And understand, the Greek word for mercy simply means this: to meet a given need. You follow that? Mercy means to meet a given need. In other words, I show mercy when I look at my fellow man, when I look at a person who has a need, and I choose to do something to meet that need. It is the basis of this. Understand this especially. Meeting the need has no attachment to getting any credit for meeting the need. It does not demand a thank you. It does not demand a response in kind. It does not mean tit for tat. It does not mean what comes around goes around. It doesn't mean I gave you one, you owe me one. It says I look and see a need, and I do what if it's within my power to act. I meet the need. This is the basis of generosity in God's economy. Now let's be very honest. What do you think motivates most people to be as generous as they are in our world? What kind of things do they get back? Accolades. Yes, there's the Myron Hawthorne wing of the hospital. I happen to give $5 million. I didn't want to mention it. But I did demand they put my name on the wing. Somehow I wanted that there, but I really don't want any credit for it. Those are the kind of things we do. Why do you think they make such big moments of saying, I'm opening this organization to help these people and we're going to give this much money from our... It is not about just trying to meet a need.
It's pharisaical.
It is very much in the issue of the Pharisees.
I'm giving away money.
It means to act in the benefit of someone else. It cannot come from a selfish heart. It cannot come from a sense of superiority. And there's the other thing that often drives generosity in people. Because if I'm passing out to people, what does it tell me about our structure?
Makes me feel like I'm better than you.
Obviously I am, because you're in need and I'm not. And watch me give it to you. Isn't this nice of me? Don't you wish you were as good as I was and had my wealth, my brains, my good looks, all those things? That's the driving power of this. This mercy comes from an aspect of the beggar. Remember the couplet? The beggar says, I don't deserve it, I don't expect it, but I know the only source of what I need comes from you. This is the kind of mercy they show. It comes from that same sense of completely, I don't deserve any of this, but God has put in my hands the capacity to meet a need, and I am going to do it when I can. Now, I want you to understand what this says about our lifestyle and our pattern. If you are going to be the kind of person who is prepared to show mercy, what kind of planning do you need to make in your life?
You have to plan to meet whatever needs that might come about. So you might have to set aside a certain portion of your money and your time and your just everything to meet other people's needs.
Exactly. Understand what Scripture talks about. There are tithes and there are offerings. Now, tithing is I set aside a certain amount on a regular basis because there are bills, there are things that there's a cost of doing ministry. We talk about the church. There's a cost of doing ministry. We have light bills to pay. We have buildings to take. There are things that are covered. That's offerings, or tithe I should talk about. Beyond that, there's a margin that we are expected to live on when we can, so that we have the capacity to meet a need as it arises. And to do that, there must be something that we've set aside in terms of our time, in terms of our resources, in terms of our talents that says, I will act on this. And you have to plan that. You have to structure a life that says, I can actually do something for someone. This is what's in view here. I look for a need and I decide whether or not I have the capacity to meet it. Can I dedicate whatever is required to do that? Whether or not I get anything back from it. Mercy. Now let's understand the word. There's a lot of things that mercy is talked about. Mercy sometimes is talked about in terms of forgiveness. Mercy means to forgive. Is that an act of mercy?
Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, it's an act of mercy to forgive, to let something go, but it's bigger than forgiveness. Understand this, because mercy acts whether there's a forgiveness needed or not, because it meets the need. Is the need forgiveness in the moment? Yes, but it's a bigger word than just forgiveness, because sometimes people don't need forgiving, they just need help. And mercy meets a need. Sometimes we talk about mercy another way. We say mercy really is another word for God's love. Okay, is mercy an act of love? Yes, but understand, love is much bigger. Does God love you when you don't need anything from Him?
Yeah.
When there's not a need for mercy to be shown, when God doesn't have to pick up one of your messes, does God still love you? Yes. So mercy is a little bigger than that. How about this? I've heard mercy as an interchangeable, say it really means grace. Mercy really talks about grace. Just another word for God's grace. I want you to think about this. What was grace specifically extended to do? Okay. Grace was extended to deal with the penalty of sin. Theologically, scripturally, grace is when God said, I'm going to deal with the penalty of sin hanging over your life. Grace deals with the law. You are no longer guilty before the law. That's what grace does. Mercy is another matter. Mercy is extended again to the issue of need. Is mercy a grace? Is there a need? Yes. Go ahead.
So are you saying mercy's all of these things?
Mercy has all of these aspects to it, but understand it's not just one or the other.
No,
And
it's
people
all
think-
of it.
it has all of these
Any
aspects
need
to
that
it.
arises.
Any need that arises. So mercy falls within the aspect of showing love. Mercy falls in the aspect of showing grace. Mercy falls in the aspect of any one of these things. Here's the big question. How do you have mercy and justice? How can God be a God of justice and a God of mercy? How do you get those two to work together? I mean, doesn't mercy kind of cancel justice out? Isn't that? I mean, we come in, you deserve, I'm mad at you, you deserve, you have the penalty, and I just go, I'll let it slide.
Same person paying the penalty is the one that extends the mercy.
It's an interesting one. Yeah, in this case, how did God justify the two? How did He work the two out? He had to pay the penalty of the sin before He could extend mercy. God's justice stands. I'm also going to put this out. Is there a point at which mercy will extend justice?
Yes.
Can you give me an example?
And when Jesus pays the penalty for our sins, right?
There's one. Let's put you in a parent's role. Is it mercy to let your child get away with anything? Is there a mercy in making a child understand the repercussions for conduct?
Yes.
Do you think that applies to adults? Is there a point at which God's mercy may compel you to deal with the consequences of a decision?
Yes.
Is it still mercy?
Yes.
Why is it still mercy?
Because if you continue in what you're doing, it's going to be bad.
It's going to be a lot worse. Consequences. Understand, there's the justice of things that a judge has to balance between the two. And we get upset when the mercy side gets too strong. We get upset when the justice side has no mercy. There's a real talent to balancing the two and understanding when to apply mercy and when mercy needs to be applied with consequences. Finding the balance. God's mercy doesn't function as silly sentimentalism. If God was strictly mercy, understand this, He wouldn't have had to send His Son. He'd just basically go, I know what I said the rules were, but let's just let it slide. Everybody just come on in. Now, how would you feel about a God that lets some of the things go that you've seen happen in this world?
Old Testament's full of people asking God, why don't you get them back for what they're doing?
And God says there will be justice. As a matter of fact, there's a very interesting claim in Scripture that says there's going to come a day when there's going to come justice with no mercy. God said there's going to be a point at which you cross, that which certain things are done, to where mercy will stop entering the picture. That's a very scary statement. When God says, I want to be merciful, but there's a point at which I won't be anymore.
Kind of have to have way with Noah and the flood.
That was his point. Mercy is done. We're starting over. The kind of mercy is to be a quality of our life. Jesus was very serious about this standard. To be merciful is that tempering in all things we do. And Scripture goes on and on about these, that you have to be merciful. Did you know that Proverbs even has a command that we should be merciful to animals? Peter should love that. That's from Proverbs 12:10, that we're to be merciful in all these things. Mercy always comes in this regard, that it puts you in the position to meet a need, to show a kindness that you don't have to. You could walk away from it. Mercy is a decision point. Mercy is extended because you see a need. How often do you see a need that you decide not to meet? Yes, as people we do. Yes, Tim?
When that mention of your PETA comment about Proverbs, as a kid on a farm, I always wondered why we went through so much work to bale straw, pay people to stick it in a barn, spend a few days stacking it in there, and then every day through the winter, break out a couple bales so you could throw it on the manure floor in the barn just so the cows didn't lay down on it. You know what I'm saying? Why do they have to have a place to sit down?
It's a cow, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I've thought about stuff like that, and there's lots of examples with this kindness. When you see farmers, it shows you their character of them when they seek to be kind in that way. But a lot of farmers go through the work to be kind to their animals, and it costs them money to do it.
Yeah.
It's amazing if you just stop to think of the things that they do for that.
You can go through Old Testament laws, and the manner of slaughtering an animal always was showing you didn't want it to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an animal. Why'd you care? Because there's an aspect of mercy. Mm-hmm. You establish and understand what it does. It's what it does to your character. When you choose continually to extend mercy in situations, do you think that changes you as a person? Changes how you think? Causes you to pause and see things from a different angle than just your own all the time? This is a character-changing issue that God is bringing before us. To extend mercy compels us to stop and consider others. To look for needs, yes.
But they made a really good movie about mercy, Les Miserables.
Yep.
That mercy the priest showed Jean Valjean then was a rippling effect of his whole life. I know it's just a story, but you hope that in your showing mercy that It came at a time when someone really needed it and impacted them so much that they would then turn around and show mercy to someone else.
It is character changing, and it can be dramatically character changing. Any parent should know this.
Yeah,
The manner in which we extend mercy, not sentimentalism,
right.
not looseness of standards, but mercy
Mercy.
changes how a child views things. And it changes people. I think the story is based in life experience. It does. Mercy changes. Seeing real mercy, someone who extends to you for no gain of their own. It's a changing moment if you're watching. And it's a changing moment if you are doing it consistently in your own life. This is a character moment that Jesus is bringing up here. All of these had to be shocking to the Jews because all of them talked about who you are rather than what they wanted. And this is why this moment was so shocking for them. Everybody came here to hear the king with an expectation of this is what I want. And instead they hear an opening discourse. But this is what you need. This is what they weren't prepared to hear, and this is why they did not leave happy. The king talked about a kingdom of character, and they wanted a kingdom by the sword. Let's close this up, and we'll go to questions or comments here with our group. Thank you for listening.
Wait. Could you put on here what you told us about the segment, when we're going to meet, when we're not, when we're going to be together as a church, and those, that way that people listening online.
Okay, we'll continue on. We've been asked, just to bring you up to date, if you weren't in our regular service, those who are watching, our Sunday school meets here at 10 o'clock on a regular basis here at the Kuzichess. We'll be here one more week. The week following that, on the 22nd, there is a joint church service. The entire church will be meeting at Desert Sands Park on the 22nd at 10 a.m. So we will not be meeting. It would look really bad for me to have a competing meeting with the church meeting as an elder. It wouldn't look real supportive. So we're not going to meet here on the 22nd. The following weekend, we will be able to go back to our regular classroom at the church. So the Sunday after Thanksgiving, we can return to our regular time. So just to be aware of that. So the 22nd, joint church service. 29th, we'll be back in church. But we will be here next week. So either listening or whatever, we'll be at the Kuzichevs one more week, unless Ben and Paula get so fed up they throw us out. But we're hoping that doesn't happen. I believe Tim still has a key. We'll get in even if they don't want us. So we'll meet one more week here, and then after that, we'll be heading back to the church. Now we'll close up.